I think it's really interesting that we're talking about health today, and the first topic is menopausal. And when I just spoken to the two of you, and in fact all of the real women, at some time or another the conversation comes around to menopause. Well, in the studio we are joined by two doctors. We have Katherine Kearley-Shiers, a menopausal specialist, and Dr. Katherine Richardson, a GP in Lawrence Hill. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you both? How are you?
Really well. I'm so pleased to be here. It's just wonderful. Thank you
it's
for having
lovely,
us.
absolutely lovely to welcome you both. The whole show is going to be dedicated to menopause. Do you think we'll have enough to talk about?
I think we will fill our time very well.
Well, believe it or not, there may be some people out there, both Katherines, people might be thinking, what is menopause anyway? So I think that's where we should start, women, isn't it? Yeah. Can you give us just a description of what it is? What does it mean?
So it's a really common question that we get asked a lot. What is menopause? Because there's lots of words that you'll hear around that as well. So perimenopause, postmenopause, menopause. So menopause is your last period. So your last natural period, because some people will have periods that have stopped for other reasons. So certain contraception will stop periods. If you've had chemotherapy, that might stop your periods. Surgery, that might stop your periods. So the word menopause means your last natural period. And how do you know when your last period is? It's something you decide once it's happened. So when you haven't had a period for 12 months, that is menopause. So it's almost a day, the day of your last period, menopause. And then the months to years leading up to that, your hormones are starting to become a bit more variable and your periods might become more irregular. And that's when people, on the whole, find that they get symptoms.
Okay. And you did in that answer mention perimenopause. What does that mean?
So perimenopause is that time where you're getting symptoms, things are becoming a bit more irregular in terms of periods leading up to that last final period.
Right.
So the lead up to the menopause is the perimenopause. And then once you've had your last period, then we would say that's postmenopause.
Okay.
But people talk about menopause meaning perimenopause and postmenopause. So it's,
all quite jumbled.
It's all in there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Before we started, the real women were talking about. We were saying, why is the word men in menopause? I didn't quite hear an answer. But is that a thing? Do people ask that? Menopause men. What have men got to do with it?
I mean, I totally agree, and I think that a lot too. It menses is I think maybe Greek for period. So again, I don't know why men is in there, but that's the sort of origin of the word.
Well, maybe that's the reason then.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me just go to our other Katherine, Dr. Katherine Richardson. You're a GP in Lawrence Hill. Is it a very common thing when women come to you and say, there's something strange going on in my body, but they don't necessarily realise what it is? Is that a thing for you in your practice?
Yeah, I think it's really common. I think increasingly women are becoming more aware of menopause and what symptoms might come with it. But sometimes I do get women who just come in and they're sort of desperate, really, where they say, I just don't know what is going on, but I don't feel like me anymore and I don't feel like myself. And I think that can feel quite scary because it can affect all aspects of your life. And I think often when women are going through the menopause, this is a time where they might have young children, they might be caring for their older parents, they're also potentially at the peak of their careers as well. And suddenly all of that is just feeling really difficult and challenging for them. And so I think when they reach out to us, they're just really needing support and help.
Do you know what? I think we need to unpick some of that, When you say, Katherine, it could change your life. I think we've all experienced that in one way or another. I mean, I'm a woman who still does the school run, for example, and I'm well into my menopause. And this is really strange. It is really a strange feeling, but it's real for me. Medication. What can I do? What do women do? I know they go to the doctors, and that would be an easy thing to say. Go and see a doctor. Get it sorted. Is it as easy as that?
I think we would hope that when you go to see your doctor, you will get that support that you need. And but I think there are lots of things you can also do around it. So yes, maybe all of us here have heard of HRT, and maybe we can talk about other medical treatments that as a GP we can prescribe. But there are lots of other things that women can do that can support their health, which we know can help. And sometimes it's not just one quick fix that will help. It's a cumulative of lots of sort of health in terms of exercise, in terms of diet, in terms of we were talking earlier about herbal things as well. And it might be a mixture of all of those that might be enough to just mean that you feel like you can still do all the things that you need and want to do in your life.
Well, there's one more question I want to ask before we all come in is HRT. What does it do? How does it help? Which Katherine would like to take that?
So hormone replacement therapy, so that's what the HRT is standing for. So when you become perimenopausal and menopausal, you've got your estrogen hormone, which is going up and down, and HRT is replacing that estrogen to try and stabilize things out, because it takes a while for your body to get used to those different levels of estrogen. And that's where a lot of the symptoms come from. So if you're using HRT, you're replacing that estrogen, and your body has receptors for estrogen absolutely everywhere. So that's where you get so many symptoms. And then giving the estrogen back just helps smooth things out and ease those symptoms. But for many women who have a womb, they need to take a hormone called progesterone, and that's because the impact of estrogen on the lining of the womb can make the womb lining grow too thick, and if you leave that for too long, you can get cancerous growth. So if you have a womb, you need to have that other hormone, the progesterone hormone, to protect it and keep it safe.
Right. Thank you, HRT. Okay. So, ladies, we've got the background.
Yeah.
I think we might have even needed that background. It's given us a different perspective, maybe. What's your take on what you've heard?
Well, for me, we're talking 14 years ago that I actually went through menopause. And I was thinking about that last night, what's still relevant, what's changed, are there new things out there? I mean, at the time, I was very tearful, more than usual, but it was the night sweats. It was eating food and then an hour later just feeling so unbearably hot, or waking up in the middle of the night. And I think it was that symptom more than any other that sent me to the GP. And I was really lucky. It was a guy that I went to see. He's retired now. And he said, I know what you're going through. Yes, surprising for a man. He knew what I was going through because his wife was going through it. And we looked at my medical history. I won't go into loads of detail, but I'd had a DVT, which meant I wasn't a candidate for HRT. So he's looking at alternatives, because if you've had a major DVT, there are problems with blood clotting. And he put me on, I think it was a very low dose, I'll call it a tranquilizer. And it helped a lot. And one of the things that they had found out, that it helped with night sweats. And I can honestly say, once I was on that went. And I was pretty numb for a little while, so I wasn't crying. But it's a long time ago. And I'm thinking, have things moved on? If I was going through that now, would I be offered the same treatment, or would there be other miraculous cures? What is out there for people?
Things are changing all the time, and there's always more research. And I actually will often talk to women who come to see me and just say, this is the research that we have now, and this is the advice I can give you now. Things may change, and that's why we need to keep talking, and reviewing things. But in terms of when you've had a DVT, your GP was absolutely right that we do need to be more cautious. But it is not necessarily an absolute in terms of HRT that you couldn't have it. So that would be something that we would talk to you about those risks. And it might be that we have to talk to you about the type of HRT we give you to mean that we minimise those risks for you. But when I'm talking about HRT with women, I will give them the options. So HRT, these are the risks that come in your case. And we can maybe minimise those risks if we give it in this particular way. But these are the alternatives. And so we might try, like in your case, I don't know exactly what treatment that you were given, but we could try that. Maybe comes with less risks first. And if that's not treating you enough, it's not giving you what you need, then you can always come back and we can then try HRT. It doesn't have to be, this or nothing. It's always a discussion and an ongoing discussion.
I think the outcome of that, and listening to you and thinking about my experiences, do you know there always is something out there? Don't suffer alone at home. Just go to your GP and go and discuss what is there, whether the research has changed what you would be given. There is someone who can help you. Absolutely. Don't suffer alone.
Is it true to say that some women suffer more than others? Because I've actually met women, my mum in particular, who said, menopause, well, what's that? What's all that about? Just get on with it. And I said, oh, Mum, did you ever feel that you were really hot and you couldn't sleep and you got really frustrated sometimes and maybe you would cry? Oh, the hot and cold thing. Oh, just take some ginger tea. So obviously my mum didn't suffer as much as other people that I know who really had a really awful bad time, to the point where they may feel suicidal. I mean, that's the other side of the coin, the scale. What would you say to that? I mean, women have different experiences.
They do. And I think the amount that people feel able to talk about it often influences their recollection of their symptoms, a bit like with your mum thinking it's not a thing, but actually if you go through the symptoms, she's like, oh yeah, no, I did have them, but she may not feel she had the menopause per se. They have the symptoms, but if you're not talking about it, it's hard to really grasp what's happening. I mean, 1 in 4 women will have severe symptoms. Those are, as you're mentioning, so a real decline in mental health, very significant night sweats that stop people sleeping. And I think the sleep is really a massive symptom because that impacts the day so much. If you haven't had any sleep, you can't remember words, you're forgetting meetings, you're putting the butter in the dishwasher, you're irritable, you're angry. All of those things are going to be made worse by not sleeping. And sleep can be affected by the night sweats, but also just even without the night sweats, some people will have really disturbed sleep and they wake up and they can't get back to sleep. And that's very impactful for the next day. And then other people, they don't have very many symptoms. And it's just one of those things we don't really know exactly why. Some people's symptoms are so different to somebody else's. It can also be changed by things like if you've had a surgical menopause. So if your ovaries are removed for a medical condition, that's often very abrupt. So I tend to see women having quite significant symptoms when they have a menopause in that way. So it's very variable for lots of different reasons.
Sue?
Right, so my menopause was about 20 years ago now, and there probably wasn't the help then that there is now. I had the hot flushes. I sort of managed with them. They used to steam up my glasses sometimes. That was a bit of a nuisance. I got very angry sometimes, and I had no idea that was to do with the menopause to start with, till somebody said it might be hormonal. But what took me completely by surprise, and I went to the doctor and I didn't get very much sort of understanding about it, was that my libido dropped to 0 and I had a lot of vaginal dryness. So intercourse kind of became almost impossible. And, that has a big effect on people, doesn't it? And I now know you can get creams and stuff. I don't know if there's an answer to the libido side of it, but that took me by surprise. Is that more, I don't know how widespread that is, or if there's much help for it now?
I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think a lot of women really struggle to mention this. So even when they come to see me, and you'd think that that would be that safe place where you can talk about all your symptoms, often the sexual health side is where I will still have to bring it up as to say, and how is this? Because women don't know that they can discuss it with me. And they don't know that it's okay and it's important to discuss it, because it's a huge thing that women can lose that libido. It might be their desire. It might be that they don't get enjoyment from sex when they actually do try. Or in your case, you mentioned about how you felt dry down below, and therefore it can be really sore and painful, and therefore you're not going to necessarily get enjoyment from it. And I think there can be lots of different reasons why you can have sexual problems when you go through the menopause. And part of it might be, like we talked about, the estrogen, those hormones changing. Part of it might be that the estrogen in your, like where with your vagina and your vulva, that's therefore less. And so therefore you're getting dryness and soreness. But yes, and that's where I think if you can find a doctor who you feel that you can be open with and you can have those conversations with, it's so important, because then you can find out exactly what it is that is meaning that you're no longer able to enjoy sex, and they can give you the right options for you.
This is Real Women. We are here in the heart of Bristol. Like I say, you are all very welcome, especially Dr. Katherine Kearley-Shiers and Dr. Katherine Richardson, both here talking about menopause with us today. And what a fantastic and interesting conversation it is. I've just learned that my colleagues here have gone through theirs. I am going through mine, and I really do want to talk about, and I know we have mentioned it, I want to talk about symptoms some more. And can I just tell you a story? And this is where this question comes from. So a friend of mine, she went to work. She drove her car to work. She parked the car. She went into work. She did her work. Everything was fantastic. She came out of work and she got the bus home. And she realized when she got home that she should have, she'd left her car at home. Is that typical? I mean, we're talking symptoms now. Is that a typical symptom?
I've definitely come across people with that symptom.
Yeah.
I was speaking to lots of women who are experiencing menopause symptoms, and all sorts of memory things will happen. So, ringing their partners to say, where's the car? You've taken the car, and they haven't. They've just parked it down the road and then forgotten about it. Mm-hmm. Or putting things in funny places because their memory just isn't working in the same way. So memory changes are very common. And another thing that people I hear a lot is, I think I've got dementia. And that's a really frightening thought, but it's not dementia. It's to do with the way your brain needs estrogen to function, and that up and down nature of your hormones around the time of the menopause means your brain has to adapt, and that takes a while. It does happen. It's just that transition where all these things are happening, including your memory changes.
Yeah. So memory, okay, that's one thing. Hot and cold sweats, we've mentioned that. What is that about? Why?
That, again, is to do with your brain. So your temperature regulation happens in a particular part of your brain, and there's lots of estrogen receptors there. So when your hormones are going up and down, your brain is getting confused with those estrogen levels being, so much like a roller coaster. So it will tell your body that you're hot and you need to sweat to cool down, but you're not. And people will often have triggers like eating and anxiety. And the more that you think about a hot flush, the more it will start to happen. So that's why some treatments for hot flushes can involve thinking about the thoughts that you have and the anxiety symptoms that are driving the flushes, and then you can see an improvement in the flushes.
Any more that you want to mention, ladies? Symptoms?
Well, it's 14 years ago, but I think you still remember that time. Nobody called it the menopause, by the way, in my family. Nobody would say, are you going through your menopause? It was always, are you on the change? And I think in some respects that's quite a good word, because it is change. And I like the word you use, transition. And you're coming out of ovulating every month or twice a month for some of my family. And you're coming to the end of something, but it's not coming without its symptoms or its pain. And I think that happens at the beginning, doesn't it? When you become a woman, when you have your first period, that's a big change. You know, you're hormonal, you're all over the place, you're very ratty suddenly, you don't understand why. And it's such a surprise that every month you become this person and you can't remember why you do. And I think it dramatically ends like that as well. So I think there's symptoms at the beginning, symptoms during, and symptoms at the end. But for me, it was the night sweats. That was the first I'd ever experienced that.
Right. Wow. I just want to move on, and I'm thinking of culture. I've mentioned my mum, and I'm thinking of culture and the ideas that certain women from certain places around the world have. What kind of questions do people come to you with from a cultural point of view? Because you may see, and it may be obvious that they're going through menopause, but for the women themselves, they may not recognize it as a menopause, or maybe it may be something just like a change. Do you experience that in your practice, especially Lawrence Hill?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's so important to look at somebody's background and culture as a medical professional, because it does change things. I think in terms of how different communities might come and present, I often find that if they have maybe a Black, African, Caribbean culture, they might not necessarily come to see me because of their menopausal symptoms. They come to see me because their periods have stopped and they're worried about their fertility. And so that's the thing that's often very important to them. And they ask me, how can they get their periods back? Because they still want to have children. And it's only then when we actually talk about it, depending on their age, we might do hormone tests, and I say to them that you're menopausal. At that point, often it can feel really upsetting for them. And it's not something that they culturally necessarily will talk about. I have had women come and talk to me, and they've said that within their culture that so this was often Somali cultures, there's a lot of a shame and embarrassment around menopause because fertility is so important. And I think that that's a really important thing for us to discuss, because actually, if we know as women, as humans, if there is that shame or embarrassment, it's so much harder then to manage the symptoms and talk about them. And actually, that we shouldn't have shame, we shouldn't have embarrassment, because we're all women and we'll all be going through different things. And by talking about it, we know it can help.
Do you recognise that in the Western culture as well? Because I notice, especially in employment, a lot of women I used to work with didn't want to talk about menopause because it felt like, to them, they were saying it felt like they're getting older and they don't want that. They don't want to share the fact that they are of that age. Is there something in the Western culture regarding menopause? It's kind of hush, hush, don't talk about it. It's embarrassing, it's shame. I mean, do you recognise all of that? Does that resonate with you, with people that you see?
Absolutely, completely. And I think when, if you go back a few years before, we were talking more about menopause, which is such a positive thing to have happened, that was particularly noticeable. And I think I kind of wondered whether before, women were just tired of being dismissed about things. So, periods, we can't really talk about them and just get on with that. We don't really want to talk about that. And then pregnancy, and people say, it's not an illness, just get on with it. You just keep going as if nothing is happening and you're having this experience. And then they get to menopause and they're like, well, what's the point in talking about it? Because no one's going to listen or take notice. And then I think the Davina McCall documentary really put it back on people's agendas to talk about it more. And that's been such a positive thing, because then women are inspired to do more things about it and to share, and those shared experiences are so supportive. So I think that's really important. And I think within Western culture, youth is so prized. Everyone doesn't want to get old. And then the menopause transition starts happening. And as you say, it's a sign that we are aging, we all age. And other cultures like in Japan, that's less prevalent, a sense of menopause happening, it being a transition and it being not so shameful. And symptoms are a bit different in Japanese women. So some of that's to do with diet as well, but they tend to get less hot flushes and night sweats and more things like stiffness and joint stiffness, shoulder stiffness in particular.
And that's less in Japanese women?
No, so the Japanese women have less sweats than the Western women.
And you think that might be because of diet?
So diet's important. So the sort of traditional Japanese diet is more plant-based, lots of vegetables, pickled foods, and lots of soy. So soy is quite structurally similar to estrogen. So there's that, but also the type of exercise that people are doing, and then the cultural ideas of aging not being so negative.
Like it's all right to get old.
And it's a peaceful, more peaceful thing, I think.
Oh, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? It sounds good to me. There's something that you mentioned, Dr. Katherine, about sharing, and I want to feed into that point because I'm quite a shouter at home and I'm not proud of it, but I do tend to shout a lot, and especially around the children. And I had to sit them down once and say, listen, children, mummy's going through something at the moment and this is what it is. This is what it's called. And I might shout quite a lot. I don't mean it. But, so we had this conversation and they were so lovely, so sweet and so kind to me. And I felt much better after just being able to share that. Is that something that you would recommend? Because like you say, there's a lot of secrecy, or there can be a lot of secrecy around menopause. But once you come out and share that with your family, I would say that it kind of makes things better. How would you respond?
Absolutely. I think anytime from a mental health perspective, we all know that feeling when you're just holding on to something and you don't want to burden other people. But then when you do, you let it out and you've got a wonderful response, hopefully from your family and friends. You can feel in your body that you feel lighter and you feel like things are easier. And I think that's the same is absolutely true within menopause as well. I also think what a wonderful thing you've done for your children, because you've helped them when they get to that point, if they're girls at menopause, but if they're boys as well, when they support maybe their partners in the future. I just think that education around it and understanding that we're all going through things, but also so that they know that it's you shouting. It's not about them. It's about you and you're dealing with something. And that's something that's important. And I often will say to my patients, particularly sometimes when you're starting HRT and you're adding those hormones. I know Katherine's mentioned about in the perimenopause, your hormone levels, your estrogen is going up and down. And then so when you add in that HRT with the estrogen, often it can then, in those first few weeks, be a bit unstable as well. And you might feel a bit more emotional. You might feel a bit more different. As just say, if you can, talk to your family, tell them this is what you're doing, this is where you might be at, and so that they can support you and look out for you over these next few weeks.
Well, in a moment, I'm going to ask you about contact groups, advice, emotional support, that kind of thing. And if you wanted to take your pens and papers, now would be the time to do that out there. But in the meantime, I do want to just come to Sue and you, Julie. Did you ever talk to your children or partners, or did you open up your heart about menopause when you were going through it?
I think mine might have left home by the time I got to that stage. My children, yes, sure I would have talked to my husband about it, But as I say, there were things I didn't realise were part of it to start with. The anger, because I'm not normally somebody who gets angry, and to feel very angry about something was a new experience and felt a bit scary.
I was single at the time, so all those symptoms were not inflicted on somebody that I was living with. But I did share with my family. I've got a really good support group, got lots of female relatives. And somebody is always going through what you're going through, whether it's a friend or colleague at work. You can actually see the symptoms sometimes. And I think that's one of the things that's really important. Even if you're not going through that particular stage in your life, get some knowledge, get some information that you can help people on that journey. So you can say, yeah, I went through that. Don't know what's out there now for you, but, go do something. Just be that supportive person, be that nice, kind person we were talking about last week, that you can step in and help and signpost.
Lovely. One of we did mention, I know I mentioned suicidal thoughts, which sounds absolutely horrendous when you associate that with menopause. But for some women, that's absolutely the case, and that's true. And so mental health would be a word that we've also mentioned it within this conversation. We're not going over the top here, are we?
Absolutely not, unfortunately. And I think that's when, Katherine mentioned about 1 in 4 women will have severe symptoms. For those 1 in 4, it can be absolutely debilitating. And I think mentioned it before, but that sadness of just feeling like they are no longer themselves. Their life is not theirs, and they're not able to live it the way they want to. And in terms of, Katherine mentioned about how periods often, we were just told to get on with it, but we know that some women have really severe PMS symptoms, so premenstrual syndrome, and that can get worse as they get older and towards the menopause. And we're now talking about PMDD, where there's really severe PMS symptoms, and that's often can become more apparent through menopause, and that's where you will often get those suicidal thoughts happening. And it can be really fluctuating through the month as well, which I think also can be really debilitating. When you're talking to friends and family, and you can be fine 1 week, and then the next week you're really not. And that uncertainty and that up and down nature of it, I think, can be really hard for women.
Yeah. I think also sometimes women have to own themselves and own what they're going through. I remember going to give a presentation, and I stood on the stage and I started it, and then there was just a word that I didn't have and I wanted, and it was there somewhere, but I just couldn't bring that word out. It was like brain fog. I could not remember what that word was. So I looked into the audience and I described the word to the audience, and they shouted it out to me. And I said, thank you. And for me at that moment, it was just owning my brain fog and owning why that was going on. And if I had an ounce of advice, that would be just to own it. It's okay. It's happening to you. And there is help out there, which leads me quite nicely to the help that you're going to suggest. So if women are listening to this conversation, or even men, and they know women in their lives who are going through this, are there contact numbers? What would you suggest? How would they get help for themselves?
Knowledge is power. So understanding what's happening, seeing which symptoms you've got, and reading about that is really going to be helpful. And there's a lot of stuff online. It's not all the same. So the websites that are sensible and I recommend are Menopause Matters and Women's Health Concern. And both of those websites have lots of fact sheets on everything you could want to know about the menopause and the treatment options, including ones that are prescribed by a doctor, but also including complementary therapies, because there's huge numbers of those around lifestyle changes, migraine and HRT and menopause, all these sorts of fact sheets. So they're really, really good place to start. Mm-hmm. And there's another website called Rock My Menopause, which also has a symptom tracker on it. So that can be helpful if you're not quite sure what's happening, to just keep a little diary. And then when you have that information, you're really prepared to go, if you then want to see somebody in your GP surgery to talk more about your options. And you've just got a bit more of an understanding and an idea about what you might want or the questions that you might have.
There certainly is a drive that says don't go to your doctors if you don't need to. Would you say that this is something that you would need to go to your doctor about?
I think it very much depends on your symptoms. We've talked about how variable they can be. Some women genuinely seem to be on the whole okay. And in that case, if you look at these websites and you make those lifestyle changes and you feel like you are managing, then that's fine. You don't necessarily need to see your GP. But I think as soon as you feel like actually you're no longer managing, you've maybe looked at those websites, you've tried these things and they're not helping. And as soon as you are struggling, and before you're getting to that point, we don't want you at the point where it's too much. It's you know that you're at that point. Just come and talk to your GP, and I would hope that you would get a really supportive response from them. And I think if you've got a good GP, they will talk through those options with you, talk about your specific medical history, and therefore what would be the right treatment for you.
Some GP practices also will have support groups. So from an education perspective, I know there's surgeries where you can sign up and go on a Saturday morning and within a group of other women talk about menopause and the symptoms and the different options that there are. So checking out what's available locally, I think, is really important.
Excellent. Ju?
I would like to mention there are some positive aspects to menopause. You're no longer going out there having to buy sanitary towels or whatever. You don't have to worry about periods and are you heavy bleeding and you're getting up from your office desk. Is that going to be embarrassing? There are some positive bits. There is some freedom there.
Do you know what? What a lovely way to stop. There are some positives about menopause. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Katherine. Both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you into the studio to talk about menopause. And I'm sure that you've helped a lot of women this morning. I'm hoping that we'll see you again. But for now, thank you so much.